The morning light poured through the kitchen window, soft and golden, settling on the steam rising from my mug of chamomile tea. I sat at the table in my usual spot, the one closest to the window, where I could watch the dogwood tree sway and pretend that peace was something permanent. It had become a ritual tea silence, and the memory of a home I built with love. That silence was broken by the sound of the front door opening and closing with practiced ease. I didn't need to turn around. I knew it was Callum. His footsteps were familiar, confident. He walked into the kitchen with a folder tucked under one arm and a tight smile stretched across his face. "Morning, Mom," he said, setting the folder down in front of me. "I brought the paperwork we talked about. Just a few signatures for your health coverage, nothing major." He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table. His eyes searched mine, steady but shallow. I glanced down at the papers. Legal language danced across the page in dense paragraphs. I picked them up, turning one over, squinting slightly. "Do you want me to read through these first?" I asked. Callum leaned forward, brushing my hand lightly. "It's standard stuff. I've already reviewed everything with the insurance rep. Just sign here and here," he said, tapping two places marked with small yellow tabs. There was something rehearsed in the way he said it, something too smooth. But I didn't push back. Not yet. My fingers wrapped around the pen. I hesitated. Then I signed. The moment the pen left the paper, something in his face changed. "Perfect," he said, his voice loud in the quiet kitchen. "Now you're officially homeless." "This house is mine." I looked up from the page. His smile had turned cruel sharp in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, pushing boundaries and breaking curfews. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I simply set the pen down, folded the papers calmly, and looked him in the eye. "Check the last page, Callum," I said softly. His hand froze, mid-reach. "What?" "The last page," I repeated, still quiet. He opened the folder, flipping pages quickly now, and I saw it, that brief flicker of confusion in his eyes, the first seed of doubt. I leaned back in my chair, my tea untouched, as he scanned the fine print and began to understand. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that breaks the silence just enough to stir something in your chest. "Hey, Mom. Got a minute?" Callum sounded casual, maybe even cheerful. I had been knitting by the window, a habit I picked up, after Leonard passed something, to keep my hands moving, while the rest of me sat still. "I'm always here, Callum," I said. He launched into a story about someone from his office whose elderly mother had been scammed out of her retirement fund. They pretended to be from the Social Security office, he said. Wiped her accounts clean. "Can you imagine?" I murmured something sympathetic, but the story lingered with me long after we hung up. Over the next few weeks, he brought more stories. Neighbors, old classmates, distant relatives, all victimized by theft, fraud, or coercion. Each tale was more elaborate than the last, each one ending the same. If only someone had helped them protect their assets sooner. He came by more often, usually with coffee in hand and concern in his voice. "You're living alone, Mom. You're smart. But these people are getting more sophisticated. They know how to target women your age." I tried to laugh it off the first few times. "I'm not some helpless fool, Callum." I know, he said, with that soft voice children use when they want something, but even smart people get caught off guard. "I just want to make sure you're okay." He started referencing a woman named Sherry, supposedly a friend who worked at a local bank branch. "Sherry told me some families are putting properties in their children's names temporarily. That way scammers can't touch them." At first I bristled. The idea felt wrong, like handing over the keys to a locked drawer and pretending it was still yours. But Callum was persistent. "Just think about it," he said one night, sitting across from me at the dinner table. "No one's saying forever, just until the risk passes." That night, I sat in Leonard's old recliner, the one with the worn leather armrests, and tried to replay our conversations. Callum had been distant after the funeral, buried in work, missing birthdays and holidays. But now he was attentive, helpful, always stopping by, always asking how I was. Maybe I thought this was his way of coming back, of showing he still cared. So when he brought up the idea again, I didn't shut it down outright. I told him I'd consider it. He kissed my cheek, told me I was wise, and left with a brightness in his voice I hadn't heard in years. But after he left, I stayed at the window, watching his car disappear down the street, wondering why I felt more watched than protected. It was around then I began to keep a small notebook in the drawer beside my bed, where I wrote down everything he said, just in case I needed to remember exactly when concern started to feel like control. I didn't call ahead. Something in me didn't want to give him time to prepare. I baked a batch of oatmeal cookies, wrapped them in foil, and drove across town to Callum's apartment. It was a small building, older than I expected, tucked behind a row of fast food restaurants and a pawn shop. He opened the door looking surprised, maybe even annoyed, but he stepped aside and let me in. "Didn't know you were coming," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought I'd bring you something sweet," I replied, handing him the tin. The living room was cluttered. Boxes stacked in corners, unopened mail on the counter, and a smell of something sour lingering in the air. A pile of envelopes near the door caught my eye, most with red stamps that read, "Past due" or "Final notice." Callum followed my gaze and sighed. It's been a rough couple of months. I sat down on the couch, brushing aside a jacket. "Why didn't you tell me?" He dropped into the armchair across from me. "Because I didn't want you to worry. And I thought I could fix it. But after the divorce, and that warehouse deal falling through," he stopped and shook his head. "I'm in deeper than I thought." I waited, let him sit in the silence until he was ready. "I tried to get a loan," he said, "but they won't give me anything unless I can secure it with property. That's why I brought up the house." I looked at him carefully. "Callum, if you need help, we can figure something out. I can give you some money. We don't need to put the house at risk." "No, Mom," he said quickly. "That wouldn't be enough. The bank needs something solid. And it's not like I'm taking it away from you, I'd just be holding it. Temporarily." His voice softened, but I saw the tension in his jaw. I need this. I need a chance to reset." I nodded slowly, not committing to anything. A part of me ached for him, the little boy who used to leave drawings on the fridge and beg for one more bedtime story. But that boy wasn't sitting in front of me now. That night, I called Miriam Feld. We hadn't spoken in years, but she answered on the second ring. After I told her everything, she paused. "Delia," she said, her voice low and steady. "He's not asking for help. He's targeting you." Her words didn't come as a shock. They came as confirmation of something I already knew but hadn't wanted to name. I got off the phone and went to my nightstand. I opened the notebook and wrote down the date, the conversation, and underlined one sentence twice. "He needs the house for a loan." Miriam picked me up the next morning just after 9. She had that quiet resolve about her, the kind that never wavered once she'd decided something was wrong. We drove to a modest law office on the edge of town. The name on the glass door read, Jax Varela Esq, an old friend of Miriam's from her early days as a legal clerk. He was younger than I expected, with silver, threading his dark hair and a calm that filled the room before he even spoke. I told him everything about the papers Callum had me sign. The stories, the pressure, the sudden rush of concern that didn't quite match his history. Jax listened without interruption. Then he leaned back and folded his hands. "We'll prepare documents that look like what he wants," he said, "but with clauses that give you full control, irrevocable occupancy, sole decision-making authority, and restrictions on any financial use without your written consent. Legally, the house stays yours. He'll think it's his." I stared at him. "You think he won't read the fine print?" Jax smiled. "He won't. His greed will blind him." The next day, the papers were ready. Miriam went over them with me line by line. I practiced how I would present them, how I'd steady my voice where I'd pause when I'd look away. It felt strange rehearsing a lie to protect the truth. But every time I imagined my home listed for sale without my knowing, I reminded myself that this wasn't manipulation. This was defense. Callum came by 2 days later with the kids. "Hey, Mom," he said, setting a folder on the table. "Thought I'd bring the crew. They've been asking about you." Miles and Gracie ran to hug me, and I knelt to embrace them. Their hair smelled like school and peanut butter. It twisted something deep in my chest. Over dinner, Callum kept it light jokes, stories asking about my garden. But after the dishes were cleared, his tone shifted. "Mom," he said gently, "you know how much this would help us. If you love us, if you love them, just sign it. I'll finally breathe." He didn't look angry. He looked tired, desperate. And for a moment, that almost undid me. But I had already made my decision. "I looked over your version," I said, gesturing toward his folder. "But I had some concerns." Miriam helped me get a second opinion. "These are the same papers, just with better language. Safer for both of us." He barely glanced at them. "As long as it gets done," he muttered. He didn't see the way Miriam had underlined the protective clauses in faint gray ink. He didn't notice the addendum. He just handed me the pen. And I signed slowly, carefully, with the steadiness of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind over and over again. He pressed his signature beneath mine, slid the folder into his bag, and smiled like a man who had won something. That smile didn't last. Not for long. Callum showed up 2 days later, bright-eyed and confident, like a man whose problems were already solved. He brought the original documents, the ones he'd been waving around for weeks, tucked into a fresh folder. "Thought we could finally get this wrapped up," he said, grinning as he placed the folder on the table. "I had a notary lined up, but if you already have your version, that works too." "I do," I replied, pulling out the set Jax had prepared. I handed it to him with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. He barely glanced at the first page. "Is this the same?" "Exactly the same," I said. "Just cleaned up and finalized. Legal language is tighter." "Great." He slid the pages toward me and I signed where Jax had marked in blue. Then I handed the pen to him. He didn't hesitate. He signed with quick strokes, page after page, until the folder was full again. When it was done, he hugged me tight, almost grateful. "You'll see, Mom," he said. "This is going to fix everything." I nodded, said nothing. 3 days later, he took the documents to the bank. I wasn't there, but I knew what would happen. Jax had walked me through it. That afternoon, my phone rang. He didn't say hello. "They're saying I can't use the house as collateral," he snapped. "Oh, they said there's some clause about exclusive control, that the property can't be mortgaged or transferred without your written consent, that you retain all decision-making authority." "Yes," I said calmly. "That's correct." There was a long pause. "That's not what we agreed to." "No," I said. "That's not what you assumed." His voice dropped into a whisper, tight with disbelief. "You tricked me." "No, Callum." I protected myself. "You should have checked the last page." Another silence. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just hung up. I set the phone down and stood by the window, watching the sun stretch across the driveway, warm and steady. For the first time in weeks, my breath felt like my own. But I knew it wouldn't end there. He had tasted control and lost it. I knew what came next would be quieter, colder, and far more dangerous. The envelope came by courier. Thick and official, the kind you don't tear open. You slide a finger carefully beneath the flap and brace yourself. Inside were legal documents. A petition. My son had filed for temporary guardianship of my estate, citing increasing cognitive decline and erratic financial behavior. I read it twice. Then a third time. I looked for some sign that it was a misunderstanding, a prank, anything but what it clearly was. Callum hadn't just tried to take my house. Now he was trying to take me. Jax read the paperwork with his jaw tight. "This is serious," he said, "but not unusual. It's a textbook escalation when money doesn't work." Miriam stepped in like clockwork, organizing appointments with 2 doctors and a neuropsychologist. Over the next 10 days, I was poked, prodded, and tested for everything from memory retention to balance. They asked what day it was, who the president was. They asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. I passed every one, but even as I passed, I could feel something hollow growing inside me. This wasn't just about paperwork anymore. This was about humiliation, about being dragged into a courtroom and having to prove I was still a whole person. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed slowly. Miriam drove. Jax met us at the courthouse. Callum was already there, sitting next to his attorney in a crisp navy suit. He didn't look at me. The judge was an older woman with gray hair pulled into a braid. She listened carefully. Callum's lawyer painted a picture of a confused, vulnerable woman making unusual legal decisions subject to outside influence. Then Jack stood. He laid out the documentation, the test results, statements from the doctors, recordings of my conversations with Callum, his fabricated stories, his emotional pressure. Then he turned to me. "Would you like to speak, Ms. Roslin?" I rose. My knees shook, but my voice did not. My son tried to take what I built. Now he's trying to take my mind. I may be 71, but I am not lost, and I am not broken. I remember everything. I sat down. The courtroom fell quiet. The judge didn't deliberate long. Guardianship denied, she ruled. And given the evidence of coercion and emotional manipulation, Mr. Roslin is prohibited from contacting his mother for a period of 6 months unless initiated by her or in case of medical emergency. I didn't look at him as I left. Outside, the air felt too bright, too sharp. Jax touched my arm gently. "You did it." "No," I said. "I survived it." But even then, I knew surviving wasn't the same as healing. And silence never meant safety. For the first few weeks after the hearing, I didn't hear a word from Callum or the children. The silence settled in like a second winter, still and cold and strangely loud. I didn't call, though the urge pulsed under my skin every evening. Instead, I found small ways to reach the ones I missed most. I sent a box of colored pencils to Gracie's school with a note tucked inside her math folder. "For your imagination. Love, Grandma." I mailed Miles a book about constellations just like the one we used to read on the porch. One night, when I knew their mother would be at work late, I called the house. Gracie answered. "Grandma," she whispered, "I'm here, sweetheart. Just wanted to hear your voice." We didn't talk long, just enough to say I loved her, that none of what was happening was her fault, that I missed her every day. Callum found out. The next week, I got a call from the school counselor. Gracie had told her in tears that her dad said I didn't love them anymore. That broke something in me that I hadn't realized was still whole. I sat at the edge of my bed and cried. Not the tight, trembling tears I was used to. These were deep, silent sobs that came from some place older than memory. When it passed, I called Miriam. She gave me the number for a counselor who specialized in elder financial abuse. By the end of the week, I had a weekly appointment and a list of local support groups. The first time I walked into that room, I was terrified. But by the end of the session, hearing other women speak truths that mirrored mine, I felt a strange relief. I wasn't the only one. Slowly, something shifted. I started writing again, journals, memories, even small letters I never planned to send. I found mornings again. I drank my coffee outside. I smiled at neighbors. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened. And for the first time in a long while, I began to believe that I could carry love and survival in the same hands. It was on one of those mornings, warm breeze brushing through the window screen, that a new letter arrived, one that would reopen a door I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. The letter came folded in thirds. No return address, just my name written in Callum's sharp slanted handwriting. I held it for a full hour before opening it. He didn't say he was sorry. Not once. He wrote about stress, about pressure, about how everything had felt like it was closing in. He said he never meant to hurt me, that he thought he was doing what was necessary. He called it survival. I read it twice. Then I slid it back into the envelope and placed it in the back of my nightstand drawer with the others things too heavy to carry, but too painful to discard. I didn't write back. Weeks passed. Then one Saturday morning, just as I was about to bring in the laundry from the line, I heard a knock. When I opened the door, Miles stood there with a backpack slung over one shoulder and his shoelaces half tied. "I don't care what Dad says," he said. "I know you love us." I stepped aside. He came in without hesitation, like he had 100 times before. We made cinnamon rolls from scratch. He told me about school, about Gracie, about how quiet things had been lately. He didn't ask about the court case. He didn't ask about the letter. He just leaned against the counter as the dough rose and smiled when I handed him the rolling pin. When it was time for him to go, I walked him to the porch. "You're always welcome here," I whispered, tucking a folded note into his backpack. After he left, I walked through the house, slowly touching the doorknob Leonard installed 40 years ago, the one with the little notch from where he dropped it during installation. I ran my hand along the wall where we'd measured the kids' heights in faded pencil marks. This house wasn't just mine, legally. It was mine in memory, in muscle, in spirit. Callum had tried to take it, but he couldn't. Not really. Love doesn't mean surrender, especially not to those who mistake it for weakness.